Greetings, folks. Wanted to take an opportunity to try and squeeze a video or two in for you guys today for a couple of updates. This first video is just going to be kind of some random topics that I'm throwing out there, thoughts that have been on my mind, and just recent events and whatnot. First of which, this is hardly news by this point, but as of July the 7th, I'd actually received my pre-ordered copies of the Dresden Files role-playing game. Now I've had them for about 2 weeks now, but just so you can see, I've got the nice, beautiful, shiny copies in front of me, Your Story and Our World. These are some hefty, hefty books. Let me tell you, take a look right here of Your Story. I mean, the thickness on this thing is just tremendous. I believe it's about 416 pages in length. Not all of it is rules. I mean, usually when you see, these mighty RPG tomes that are that size, the Pathfinder RPG core book comes to mind. It's usually because, it's chock full of all these, detailed rules and options and, monsters and whatnot. That's not entirely the case with this game because it's built off of the Fate engine, so the actual mechanics are pretty simple, even though they take a bit of explaining, which they give plenty of examples throughout the text, which is probably what contributes a lot to its length. But it's a lot of advice. I mean, that's what these pages are really filled with, advice on how to use this game, how to make this game interesting, and basically how to make it work for you. For those who aren't familiar with the Dresden Files, it's a series of books by Jim Butcher that is invites initial comparison to the world of darkness in a way, in that it's kind of an approximation of our own world in the modern day, but albeit one with a very pervasive and active kind of supernatural underground going on that most people, that most of the normal mortal people in the world never really see, or if they see it, they just dismiss it as superstition or, hocus pocus, that sort of thing. But it shouldn't be just kind of passed off as just a World of Darkness clone, because once you delve into it, it's really it's very different than the World of Darkness in a lot of ways. Yes, there are some similarities, and Jim Butcher himself, being a gamer, has some gaming background with the World of Darkness. So it's not surprising that there are some influences that you can kind of see have rubbed off on him, or at least were kind of the springboard from which he launched himself into this series. But it really takes on kind of a spirit of its own, and he goes off in some really interesting directions, and takes his own kind of approach to a lot of the tropes that you would expect from World of Darkness, but are tackled in a different way. And so one prime example is that there are at least 4 different kinds of vampires in the Dresden verse, and they all function very differently. Okay, yeah, maybe you could argue that the vampire clans from Masquerade or from Requiem kind of follow a similar idea, where you have different, you've got Gangrel and Bruja and Tremere, and they all have different talents. But the different vampire types in the Dresden Files universe are much more dramatically different from each other in the way they work, in the way their powers work, in the vulnerabilities that they have in their societies, and everything. So it's a really good series of books. I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in kind of urban fantasy, or even just fantasy reading. They're written very well, very funny, which I think is one of the things that has helped me just get so much enjoyment out of the series, is that you never feel like you're just sloughing through some really heavy, melodramatic text. It's all kind of done with this just really energetic, upbeat, style, and it just flows very quickly, and there's one-liners and everything. To kind of show you guys, show off how much of a Dresden Files geek I am, I present to you Bob the Skull. This is a replica of the Bob prop from the actual television adaptation of the Dresden Files, made by a very talented friend of mine. He found a website where, apparently they had taken full kind of 360 photographs of Bob from the show, and had kind of displayed them out so you can see all of the detail on the actual prop. And he, being a very artistic guy, had just taken plastic model skulls and had been creating his own Bob statues. This is definitely going to be like the centerpiece of my game table when I actually get to run the Dresden Files. Absolutely love it. Bob is a hilarious character from the books, and yeah, this would just add the perfect atmosphere to my RPG table, I think. Great work. Anyway, another point I wanted to kind of bring up was that, and Clackclickbang might find this of particular interest if he hasn't heard of it already, and it's kind of old news by this point, at least a couple of months old, but for those who are into the superhero RPG kind of genre, it was recently announced that Green Ronin Publishing is going to be releasing the 3rd edition of their Mutants and Masterminds RPG, which I just recently did a video of, and you can check out my video review of that. That's of the 2nd edition. But they're releasing the 3rd edition next month, sometime next month, I believe. And they're going to be releasing it as a standalone RPG book, but they're also using it. They have purchased the license from DC Comics to make a DC. It's going to be called DC Adventures Super's role-playing game using the Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition rules. I'm very excited about this. I love the DC universe. After my kind of early teenage years, and when I started to kind of get more away from Marvel comics, I started to kind of, I don't know, DC started clicking with me, and it's kind of become my favorite mainstream comic universes. And it hasn't had its own RPG in about 10 years, since West End Games had published the DC Universe RPG back in 99, 2000, somewhere in there, which quickly went under. Yeah, so that's exciting news. Not only are we getting a 3rd edition of the Mutants and Masterminds game system, but it's going to be driving a new DC role-playing game, which is in celebration of the 75th year of DC Comics, which is kind of cool. It's all just kind of coming together right on time, which was the goal, which Steve Kenson had said with Green Ronin Publishing, that the goal from DC's standpoint was that they're celebrating their 75th anniversary, and they wanted an RPG to be in print again, and they didn't want just some kind of a source book for another RPG. They wanted a full-blown DC role-playing game, and so that was when they got together with Green Ronin, and they made the DC Adventures RPG happen. So be on the lookout for that. That's coming in the near future, and they've got several books already lined up for it. The main rule book plus a setting book, and then 2 books, which is kind of be the RPG Who's Who, which is going to be just a catalog from A to Z of I wouldn't say every DC Comics character that's ever appeared, because that would take 10, 12, 11 books, an entire encyclopedia just to cover. But the majors and even some of the B and C list characters are all going to get full stats in these kind of Who's Who catalogs, and it's going to be in 2 volumes. So that's really cool news. I'm really excited about that. I'm looking forward to it. Like there was anything else that needed to be draining from my wallet right now, but yeah, I'm excited. They're making some tweaks to the game system, which I think will make it improve upon the game with the past 5 or so years that Green Ronin has had, with basically people playing Mutants and Masterminds 2nd edition and getting feedback from that and evolving the game. And so it's shaping up to be a pretty cool year anyway. So anyway, if I have time, I'm going to come back again and try and give maybe 1, possibly even 2 more videos. Well, we'll see what happens. Thanks.